You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 516, Rainman, the story of Donald Decker. I'm your host, Kurt, and it's just me this week. With the holidays here, it's going to be a little tricky syncing up times with Rocco. So on the weeks that we can't schedule something to record together, I'll handle the show solo. I've done it before, so not that big of a deal, but we'll get them in when we can. It's just a little rough around this time of year. Now, Rainman, this isn't the Walmart sucks Rainman you may be thinking about, not the movie. This has nothing to do with autism and a lot to do with rain. This is a story that has its origins only about an hour from where I'm sitting right now, down in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and it's a crazy story. So if you've heard it before, if you haven't, it's definitely worth sitting around and listening to. So grab your popcorn and something to drink, throw in your earbuds, and get ready. For all of our U.S. listeners, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. It was just this past weekend. Well, I guess last Thursday and the holiday weekend. I ate way too much. I did a little hiking. I had a good time. I hope you did as well. And that's it for the lead-in. We're going to jump right into this episode. The Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts now. Rainman. Now, like I said in the beginning, this is not the Dustin Hoffman movie with Wapner and card counting. This isn't that. This is the story of Donald Decker. I'm going to give you the story as I've heard it myself, how I've done research. I kind of did some brushing up today on it. So I'm going to give you that story in the way that I have researched it, but there's a lot of questions. And I'll get into those at the end. But so if you think I'm kind of skipping over something that seems questionable, don't worry. I've got it at the end. We'll cover it. There's also some things in here we're going to talk about, and it seems kind of absolute the way I'm saying it. And that is because some of the story, large parts of the story, are taken from the witnesses as they reported it on not one, but two different TV shows and in some articles that I found online. So a lot of this isn't just hearsay or, this person heard that person say that this person saw that person do this other thing. No, this is actual witness testimony in a lot of cases. So if I'm saying that this person did this or this happened to that person, it's coming from those reports, not just this is what I heard. This is what these people are saying happened. I've heard about the story maybe around 30 years. Just out of high school, I worked at Liz Claiborne in Mount Pocono. Big warehouse. And this had to be in 91 or 92. One of the guys I worked with, he had asked me if I had heard of the Rainman in Stroudsburg. And at that point, I did not. So he tells me the story, and he either lived in or next to the house that this story takes place in, or a big chunk of the story takes place in. And when he's telling me the story, I just thought it was absolutely incredible. And he said that there had been a television crew filming in the area and interviewing people. And that show, one of the shows, was Unsolved Mysteries. And they aired the episode about Rainman in 1993. And along with all the other references I use as usual, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So the other show, and I believe it was in either the late 90s or early 2000s, was Paranormal Witness, and they did an episode as well. I don't know. That was on the Sci-Fi Channel. I don't know. I haven't been able to find any links to that, but you might be able to find it. If you can, let me know. I'll put a link to it in the show. So that was my first introduction to Rainman. This person who may or may not have lived in the house, but saw the interviews going on. And that always kind of stuck with me. So I remember watching the episode when it came out and hearing other people talk about it. And it's just been kind of a thing in this area for quite a while. The story itself, though, goes further back than 1992 or 1993. This happens back, well, it starts on February 24th of 1983. So 1983, Donald Decker was a prisoner at the Monroe County Jail down outside of Stroudsburg. He was serving a 4 to 12 month sentence for possession of stolen goods. So already not a good start for Donald. He was, however, given a furlough to attend the funeral of his 63-year-old grandfather. And that funeral took place on February 24th in 1983. His grandfather, though, maybe not the best person. According to Don, he was physically abused by his grandfather from the age of 7. So he's at this funeral. He's glad to not be in jail. But he's at this funeral for this person who, I don't know, he might be kind of happy that he's dead. During the funeral, though, the family and friends, they're kind of talking up his grandfather, kind of glorifying him a little bit. They were completely unaware of the abuse. Don's pretty upset about this. So they get home. Family's still, they're kind of celebrating the life of his grandfather. Don's not really having it. And on February 25th, he decides, I can't stay here. He wants to go stay with his friends, Bob and Jeannie Kiefer. They lived on Ann Street in Stroudsburg. Now, apparently, this house is no longer there. I don't know if it was demolished or if it was rebuilt, but the house is gone now. But while he's at the Kiefers, he begins really, I don't want to use the word obsessing, but he's letting these thoughts into his head, these dark thoughts about what happened to him as a child with his grandfather, how his family's kind of talking him up, and it really starts filling his head with all this nonsense. So he's in the upstairs bathroom, he's getting ready for dinner, and he starts getting this really weird feeling. He's not feeling right. He said it felt like the air had left the room. He falls to the floor. He has this vision of this old man wearing a crown, laughing at him in the bathroom window. Like, he doesn't say if it's like looking through the window, if it's projected on the window, but there's this old man laughing at him. He's wearing a crown. And as he's coming to, he realizes he has these deep scratches on his wrists. So he kind of pulls himself together, goes downstairs. He's having dinner. And Bob and Jeannie notice these scratches. Now, they don't say this anywhere, but I can imagine if a friend of yours is on furlough from prison, has just been to his grandfather's funeral, and is now got scratches on his wrists, you might be quite concerned. So they ask him what's going on. And he tells them the story. He tells them what's going on. Tells him what happened upstairs. And he says that the scratches were caused by something upstairs. After dinner, Don and Bob go into the living room and they're kind of talking. And they hear this loud bang above them. And water starts to drip down the walls. And it's starting to drip from the ceiling. And Don is kind of in this trance-like state. He's just looking forward, but he's not really seeing anything. He's just looking forward. And Bob is now freaking out because he sees what's happening with Don, but I mean, the guy's been through a lot in the past couple of days, so he's kind of more concerned about the water that's pouring out of his walls and ceiling. So he yells at Jeannie and he says, are you running any water? And she says, no. And he's like, did we leave water on somewhere? He's like, we got a problem. So she comes into the living room and they're looking around and there's all this water all over the place. So they don't own a house, they rent. They pick up the phone, they call the landlord and they say, hey, listen, you got to get over here. We've got a problem. And the landlord, whose name is Ron Van Wy, he's like, well, why do we need to come over? What's going on? And they're like, look, we got a problem. You need to get over here. So Ron Van Wy, the landlord, he comes over, and as soon as he walks in, he sees water everywhere. And he's like, what's going on? You got a burst pipe or something. We got a leak. We got a burst pipe. We got to fix this. And he starts looking around and he remembers that there's no plumbing in the front of the house. That's like the bathroom, the kitchen, all the water pipes are in the back of the house. All the plumbing is in the back of the house. So that's not good. Where's his water coming from? So they're walking around looking, and Ron, the landlord, starts to realize that it's not just dripping from the ceiling or running down the walls. The water is moving down the wall, but also up the wall. Drops of water are falling from the ceiling, but they're also falling from the wall. So they're coming horizontally off the wall, like gravity's going sideways, and they're just flying to the other side of the room. And he's like, this is not a plumbing problem. There's something weird going on here. They also notice that as the water hits them or hits their clothes, it leaves this oily smudge. So it's water, but it's not really water. And for some reason, the next course of action the landlord has isn't to call a plumber. Ron calls his wife, and he calls the cops. So 2 Stroudsburg police show up, Officer John Bejan and Richard Wolbert. And they're outside. Ron, the landlord, goes outside to meet them. And they're like, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, you got to kind of come in to see what's going on. And Bejan's like, look, we're not going in unless you tell us what's going on. And he's like, I can't. I don't know how to explain it. You just trust me. Just go inside. As soon as you walk in, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the 3 of them go back in the house, and immediately the 2 police officers start getting pelted with rain. And Wolbert, the second officer, recounts in one of his interviews that they witnessed the water going sideways across the room, and one glob of water, one big ball of water, went between him and Bejan, and it just went past them horizontally, not falling, just kind of floated between the 2 of them and went into the other room. And they're baffled. They have no idea what is going on. These 2 officers, they appear in the Unsolved Mysteries episode. So this is their actual accounting of what happened. They walk through the home and realize it's only raining in the living room. And I think by this time, Don had kind of come out of his trance, but he's still he's not all there. And the officers are like, look, we got to go because we have to report this to the chief, and we got to come up with, we don't know what to do. So we're going to take this to the chief. We'll be back. And they leave. The Kiefers and Don hadn't eaten for hours at this point. So they decide to go across the street, leave the house to get out of the rain, go across the street. There's a pizzeria, a little restaurant across the street, and they're going to get something to eat. So the landlord, Ron, and his wife, Rainmain, they decide to stay at the house and see if they can figure out where this water is coming from. So Don, Rob, and Jeannie, they leave, go to the restaurant. Now, the landlord says that as soon as they leave the house, the rain stops. So they're like, okay, one of them is causing this. The 3 of them go to the pizzeria. They go in. They're talking to the owner, this Pam Scarfano, and she had been over to the house earlier in the day. She'd witnessed the rain for herself. So when they come in, she's like, you've got a problem. It's the work of the devil, and it's coming through Don. Like, point at Don. She points at Don. She says, it's coming through him. She doesn't know if he's doing it intentionally, but she's saying it's him. He's the cause. You need to take him to a church, and you need to have a priest look at him. Maybe have an exorcism. And as she's saying this, it starts to rain in the restaurant. Now, they don't know it's stopped in the house. All they know is that now they're in the restaurant. The owner is kind of accusing Don of being the one causing this, and it starts to rain in the restaurant. So Pam Scarfano, she runs over to the register. She keeps a crucifix there. She brings it over. She puts it on Don, and he yells because it burns him. And she pulls it away, and the crucifix is now black, and he's saying it burned him. Now, Don's thinking he's possessed. The Kiefers are like, what's going on? And they decide to leave. They're like, we got to go back to the house. We got to figure this out. So they turn around. They go back over to the Kiefers' home. The landlord and his wife are still there. They walk in. Rainmain, the landlord's wife, freaks out. She starts yelling at Don. She's like, this is your fault. You're doing this. You need to stop. Whatever you're doing, you're bringing us into this home. And as she's yelling at him, I guess by this point, they're standing either in or right at the kitchen. And as she's yelling at him, the pots and pans in the kitchen start rattling and moving and shaking and banging and clanging. The lights go out, and Don levitates up off the floor, hovers there for a minute, and it gets thrown 5 feet into the cabinets. The lights come back on. He's laying on the floor, and scratches start to appear on him. Now, Rainmain is freaking out. She starts praying and invoking the name of God and doing all this stuff. She grabs a Bible. She starts praying over him. She's trying to do like a makeshift exorcism over him. So after a few hours of this, the 2 police officers show back up with Chief Roberts. And this guy is not impressed. Chief Roberts is a hardened skeptic. He's there because he just wants to show these 2 officers that they have no idea what they're talking about. They walk into the house, and they're getting pelted by rain. Now, the officers later recount in their interviews that the chief, when he was in the house, was there while it was raining, while the stuff was going on. The water's moving sideways through the house. It's going up the walls. It's coming down from the ceiling. There's water flying around everywhere. Chief Roberts just ignores it. He pulls his 2 officers out of the house, and he says, nothing happened. I didn't see anything. You didn't see anything. This is a plumbing problem. We shouldn't be involved. You're not to write a report. You're not to pursue this any further. You're not even to talk about it. We're done. Let's go. And he pulls his officers out. So there's no official police report of this because the chief is like, no, you're not doing it. Now, I don't know where you are listening to this. And I know when I lived in Florida, down south, the police, they might have taken that a little more seriously. They might have looked at that and been like, okay, we need to do a report on this. Like, I could very well see, and this is not a knock on the South, but I think they're a little more open to an idea like this, where the police might walk in and be like, that boy is possessed by the devil. And they would do something and get involved. In Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, that's not going to happen. Not ever. It was never seen, not going to be reported. They're just not going to deal with it. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk about a personal story I had real quick of something weird that happened that police were there for and what their response was. And you will understand why this part of the story makes complete sense to me. They would never have gotten involved in this. They would not have reported it. Now, despite the chief's orders, the next day, 3 veteran officers go back to the Kiefers to investigate, to try to see if they figure out what's going on and to help. Now, we got the names of 2 of them, an Officer Davies and an Officer Rundle. According to one report, they went so far as to place a paper bag over Don's head to make sure that the rain wasn't just him spitting at them. Davies gave Don a crucifix to hold on to it while they were kind of testing this stuff. And he kind of yells and throws it to the ground. And when Davies goes and picks it up, it's not scalding hot, but it's warmer than it should be just by somebody holding it. Like it was heating up. And the other officer, Rundle, witnesses that the rain starts back up. And then he says he sees Don get thrown across the room for a second time. Now he gets thrown. And this is while he has the bag on his head. So he's on the ground. He gets thrown across the room again. And they remove the bag and they find claw marks on his neck. Now, this is the report of 2 Stroudsburg officers. So this poor guy, he's been thrown across the kitchen the night before and then scratched up. He was caused to pass out or faint in the bathroom and got scratched up. And now with a bag on his head and burned by a crucifix, he gets tossed around again and gets all scratched up. Meanwhile, it's raining everywhere. So on the 3rd night, they can't figure this out. It's still raining in the room. On the 3rd night, they call in an evangelical preacher to perform an exorcism. All the other churches in the area had declined to get involved. So they bring in this Reverend Johnson, which I'm pretty sure is an alias. And she comes to the house and prays over Don, reads from the Bible, while the Kiefers and the Van Wys are holding a vigil. And as she prays, Don goes into convulsions and he starts contorting, and she just keeps going and she keeps going, and he's getting worse and getting a little more violent. And he starts to relax a little bit, and the rain starts to let up, and he relaxes a little more, and the rain lets up a little more. And then finally the rain stops. And then this is the last rain that is reported in this house on Ann Street. But that's not the end of what happens to Donald Decker. Furlough's over. He gets sent back to prison. He goes back to the Monroe County Jail, and he's placed in a maximum security cell with another inmate. After a few days, they're sitting in their cell. Don, thinking about everything that happened, he's sitting on his bunk, and he starts to think, I wish I could make it rain. Wish I had control over that. Wish I could do it. And it starts raining in the cell. Now, cellmate freaks out, starts calling for guards. You got to get me out of here. Put me in a different cell. I don't know what this guy's doing. This is freaking me out. Get me out of here. The guards come down. They see it. It's raining in his cell. Now, I don't know if they just remove this inmate or if they move Decker to his own solo cell, but he's by himself now. The guards are witnessing this, and one guard comes up to him and asks him how this is even possible. And Don says he now feels powerful and that he can control it and he can do other things. And this guard's like, yeah, sure. If you can control the rain, why don't you make it rain in Warden Keenhold's office? Go ahead. That'll prove it to me. So Decker is like, okay, let me see what I can do. And he starts concentrating. Now, after a while, the guard's like, whatever. Later on, it's probably 8 o'clock or so, I think they said, 8 p.m. And Keenhold had been in his office by himself doing paperwork. And in his reports, he said he never noticed any rain or anything, but he did notice that his shirt was drooping. And when the guard comes in, he goes in to talk to him about Decker because it's raining in his cell, and this guy's telling him that he can control the rain. So he goes in, he's like, look, we got a situation with this inmate. And as he's telling him, he notices that Warden Keenhold's shirt is wet, like right across the chest, is soaking wet. And the warden's like, I don't know how that happened. He's like, I was sitting here doing paperwork. So they kind of get up and they look down the corridor towards Don's cell, and he's just staring off into space, and this glob of water is floating down the hallway towards them, comes right at them horizontally, comes right at them, and they don't say it comes shooting at them, it just floats towards them, hits the warden right in the chest where his shirt is wet, and splashes off him. Warden freaks out. He's like, all right, we got to do something. We got to move him to another cell. We got to figure out what's going on. First thing he does, he calls one of the plumbers. Gets the plumber in. Says, go in there and see where this water is coming from. This guy's saying he's controlling the rain. So the plumber goes in, walks into the cell, stands there for a minute, gets really upset, turns around, walks out, looks at the warden and says, don't ever call me for something like this again, and walks away. It's still raining in the cell. So next, the warden does the next step that he can, and he calls in the jail chaplain, the Reverend William Blackburn, and calls him in and says, look, I need you to sit down and talk to this inmate. And he says, sure, no problem. I'll come in to do that for you. Comes in, sits down with Decker, starts asking him questions. Decker tells him what's going on, what's been happening with his grandfather, with the rain, that he can control it, all this stuff. And Reverend Blackburn says, now, come on. We all know you're making this up. It's time for you to stop. Just admit it. And as soon as he says that Decker's whole demeanor changes. When he first met him, he was kind of meek and quiet. And suddenly he starts getting this very aggressive look. The way he's talking changes, and this odor fills the room. And he said the odor smelled like death, but 5 times magnified. He can smell it. Decker can smell it. And he's like, I don't know what to do now. Like, this is really bizarre. Like, something is definitely happening in this room. And Don decides he's going to show the Reverend that he can make it rain. So he raises his hand. He starts rubbing his fingers together. And it's like this misty rain. It's like a foggy rain comes into the cell, and it starts raining. And now the Reverend's like, got to do something about this. He pulls out his Bible and he starts praying. Now, this is against Don's wishes. Don Decker says, I don't want you to pray for me. The Reverend says, I don't care what you want. This is my prerogative. This is what I'm going to do. Starts praying for him. And he does this until the rain stops and Don Decker calms down. And then that's the last time it rained. Like, that was the end of it. The Reverend says that he believed that Don was possessed. He said that what he was doing was spiritual, but not of God. But he had no explanation for what it was. Now, Donald Decker served his sentence for his possession of stolen goods and moved on with his life. But that wasn't the end of his run-ins with the law. In 2012, he wound up turning himself in for arson. He set fire to a place called Dana's Restaurant and Tavern in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania, which is, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 minutes north of Stroudsburg. And then he revealed that the owners hired him to burn the building down for insurance money. He was released on bail. But obviously those dark, intrusive thoughts never truly left him. So this story, like, that's kind of the end of the story of Rainman. But you've got rain in his house, you've got rain in the restaurant, you got rain in the jail, you've got 2 reverends, 5 police officers, some guards, some prison guards, a warden, and the landlord, his wife, the friends, the restaurant owner. You got all these people who witnessed this. What the hell happened? What happened? The reports of it. The way the rain reacted, the way it fell from the ceiling, that it came down the walls, but also was going up the walls and flying sideways. It's really, really bizarre. And the fact that multiple people gave this information really makes this a head scratcher. A lot of the commonly held explanations, commonly believed explanations for this. One, it was a hoax. It was a broken pipe. He took advantage of it, trying to get out of jail, right? But it's possible. It's plausible. that it was a hoax. But how and why would law enforcement and church officials, two reverends, security guards in a prison, not even security, prison guards, why would they go on the record? Why would they go on TV claiming that this actually happened? I mean, something like this could really damage your career. Now, I know that the warden initially didn't come out and say anything. He kept his mouth shut for a while because he really thought he'd lose his job. He'd just be ridiculed for what he saw happen. I've seen a few people bring up this next possible explanation, including there's a guy from New Zealand who he says, this is what happened. This is the story. This is what happened. I'm going to give you the whole story. And he says that the rain, the air quotes rain, was caused by ice damming. Now, ice damming is where ice buildup on a house won't allow melting water to run off, and so it backs into the house. Again, this is a very plausible explanation if it only happened in the one place. There was a major storm on February 11th of 1983. It snowed for 24 hours. It dropped over 20 inches of snow across eastern Pennsylvania. And then after that storm and leading up to the events of Rainman, the temperatures ranged from the 20s, low 20s to high 30s. So this is very possible that snow build up. It would heat up during the day. It would start to melt. The water drops to the bottom of the snow. At night, the temperatures drop. It freezes. The temperatures warm back up. More water melts down. It hits the ice. It can't go anywhere. It starts it back into the home. This makes sense. I've had this happen in places where I've lived. It sucks. But my question with this is, this would make sense if this were happening in the upstairs of the Kiefer's home, not on the first floor, not in the living room. I mean, maybe it was backing up from a porch, but the landlord even questioned leaks. And I mean, he was there for days. Being from the Northeast, being in a cold weather climate, especially when you have snow, ice damming is always a risk. So why wouldn't somebody have thought of that? And it causes damage. It can rip shingles off. It can rip siding off because that water is going to back up, and then that's going to freeze, and it's going to cause expansion. It's going to cause damage. None of that was ever brought up. And ice damming wouldn't happen just as Don is in the house and then stop as soon as he leaves, and then start in a restaurant when he walks in, and then stop when he leaves, and then start in the jail when he gets there, and then stop when there's an exorcism. That's not how ice damming works. So is it plausible? It is. And if it was just at the house in the pizzeria, I could see the ice damming and the hoax being tied together, where maybe the landlord knew that the house needed a lot of work, but the insurance wasn't going to cover it because the house was old. And here comes this storm, and weather's not always covered by insurance companies. And there's ice damming. It starts to leak in the house. And he's like, hey, let's come up with a story. Maybe we'll cover it if it's a demon possession, or at least we'll get some traction on this, and maybe I can get some money. I could see if that was the case, but why would the police admit that they saw it happen? Why would the pizzeria owner say that happened in her restaurant? Unless she was friends with them, but the police too? And all the guards at the prison and the warden are all coming up with the story just to help this guy get a new roof? It seems like it'd be easier just to have a fundraiser. I don't know. It's plausible, but there's a lot of questions. And then the third one is that it is a demon or a poltergeist or haunting, a possession of some kind. And this is like one of those personal beliefs required kind of things. I'm not going to discount it. Um, I grew up in a house that I know was haunted. I mean, I saw weird things happen in the house. So I'm not going to say that this isn't it, but there's just, again, there's some weird contradictions that make this maybe not that. You know, you I don't know. Like, that could be possible. And I don't know enough about those three things to say yes or no. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think it could have been? Is it a hoax? Is it psychokinesis? Was Donald Decker just under so much stress that he was actually causing it to happen because of what happened to him as a child? Was it a demon possession? Is he haunted? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. And I've got more questions. Like, those are just the explanations that could be. Now comes the questions. So I don't know enough about incarceration to know the answer to this. But if you're, even for nonviolent crime, if you're furloughed for something like a hardship, or what they call it, like a sympathy furlough or something, like there's someone in your family passes away and they let you go. You're a nonviolent criminal. You're let go on under the supervision of your family. Can you then just decide to go stay at a friend's house? I don't think you can. I think they have to know where you are at all times. I don't think you can just be like, you guys are being mean to me, I'm going to go stay at my friend's house. Now, obviously, it's not what his train of thought was, but you can't just decide you're going to go stay somewhere else. They never say how far away the Kiefers lived from the Deckers, just that he went to stay at their house. Now, the other thing is, the cops are called about this rain, not one or two, but 6 officers show up over the course of a couple of days, and no one questions that the furloughed inmate is making it rain and that he's not where he's supposed to be. Now, again, this could just be an omission in the story, but this seems like that's a lot of people dropping the ball. And it lends a little credence to the hoax side of it. But then why did the police say it happened? My next question, why did the landlord jump straight to calling the police? He didn't call a plumber, unless maybe he was a plumber. They never specified, but he just is like, it's raining in my house. Better call the cops. It just is weird. Now, unless, and it's just not said, that he was like, oh, it's raining in my house and there's a furloughed inmate here. Maybe I should call the cops. Maybe that's why, and they just never bring that point up. But it just seemed weird to me that if you ruled out ice damming or leakage from anywhere, and that there's no plumbing over that part of the house, that you would just jump straight to calling the cops. That just seemed a little strange to me. Now, once the police chief showed up, this brings up my next question. And this is kind of a big question. So all the reports I see, when they talk about the chief and his being skeptical and basically denying seeing anything, they all say he was one of the few people who witnessed the rain that night who deny ever seeing anything. My question is, who else denied seeing anything, and how many of them were there, and why is that never touched on? Were there like 60 people that were there, and 55 of them say nothing happened, and 5 of them say it did? That's a big part of the story that should be covered. Now, this is a long time ago. I believe Decker would be around 70 now, if I remember correctly. I think he was in his 30s or 30 when this happened. So late 20s, early 30s, so he'd be around 70. So is there even anybody around really to question anymore? But why? Who else didn't see anything? And why weren't they talked to? And then one of the sources I used was, I think it's called Wiki Fandom or Fandom Wiki or something like that. And it's a wiki page that's built for the show. Well, for a lot of shows, but in this instance for Unsolved Mysteries. So this particular section is done just for this episode, this particular story in this episode, because I think there's two stories in the episode. And this is the story that says that he was put in a maximum security cell when he went back, and that this is like a 3-day event that happened. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things I started to question was the Monroe County Jail. Now, I remember it being called the Monroe County Jail when I was really young, when I was younger, and Monroe County Correctional Facility in later years. So I looked up the Monroe County Jail because they said maximum security cell. And I don't think prisons, maybe they do. Again, I don't know enough about prisons, but I don't think jails will have like a minimum security and a maximum security area. It's the facility itself that would be minimum or maximum security. So why would you have maybe it's just a weird way of wording it. I don't know. But so I looked up the Monroe County Jail, the Monroe County Correctional Facility, and they didn't start processing inmates in their current building, known as the Monroe County Correctional Facility, until 1988. This story takes place in 1983, when it was the Monroe County Jail. So the maximum security part, it may mean nothing, but it is a discrepancy in the story. The Monroe County Correctional Facility, according to this Wiki Fandom page, this website, that hosts one of the main stories, probably one of the most detailed accounts of the story online, on their own page, on their own website. When you look up the Monroe County Correctional Facility, it says that it is they say minimal security prison. This is not well written. It says it's a minimal security prison where the least risky prisoners stay to be reformed. This prison housed the prisoner Don Decker for a year after he was convicted for possession of stolen property. I think they meant to say possession. During this time, he left the prison for a day to attend a funeral. When he got back, he changed. The inmates and the guards were scared of him because by then they have heard of the incident of what happened at the Kiefer home. He was moved to a solo holding cell before the warden called in a priest to exorcise him of the demon. Now, again, obviously this is user written content, not well written, but he left the prison for a day. This whole story is based on the fact that this took place over at least 3 days. So at least, actually 4 days. The funeral was on the 24th. He went to the Kiefers on the 25th. And then on the third night, so the 25th, night of 25th, 26th, 27th, is when they called the Reverend Johnson. And then he went back to jail. So 4, maybe 5 days. This says here he left for a day. So again, it may mean nothing. This is user-generated content in a wiki. But that's a big discrepancy. That seems like something that a TV show should have caught. 2 TV shows definitely should have caught. So I don't know. I tried to look more into the Monroe County Jail to see if I could find if they had maximum security and minimum security. Now, the new prison is a prison, the Monroe County Correctional Facility. I know that there was I don't remember what year it was. It was in the 2000s, so well after this happened. But at that point, they did have at least a maximum security area. And I'm not sure what the prison itself is, because there was, I guess you call it a revolt, where some the prisoners refused to get back in their cells, and it was like an overnight thing. They got it resolved, but they did say, and that was a news article talking about it was maximum security prisoners. So, but that was after, that was in the new building, and it may have been updated since then, but that was opened in 1988. So prior to 88, it was the Monroe County Jail. And I don't know, I think that was just in the courthouse. That wasn't a separate building. So how many people were in there? I don't know if they had a warden. So again, these are things I don't have enough information about, but they're just enough to shed enough doubt on this story. But then I always circle back to, even with all the doubt, why on record, on tape, video, would police officers and wardens come out and say that they saw the things that they said, and say that they saw these things, that they witnessed the rain, they witnessed it not just leaking from the ceiling, but going up the walls and going sideways? Why would they say this on video if this was a hoax? To this day, this still remains an unsolved mystery, and no one has any information as to what happened. As far as I know, Donald Decker is still alive, and to this day maintains that this is the truth, that this is what happened. On the other side of that, though, he also burned down a restaurant for insurance money. So is this guy possessed by a demon? And that's why he does these things? Is that what causes people to do things like this? I don't know. Really a bizarre story. Now, I did say that I had a story about the Stroudsburg police, a personal story. So at the one point in the Rainman story, the chief tells his officers, we're not going to report this. You're not to pursue it. You're not to talk about it. It's never happened. And that didn't surprise me. And the reason for that is, it had to be 97, 98, 99, somewhere in there, 1999, somewhere in the late 90s. It was before the 2000s. And I was in Stroudsburg, actually probably not far from Ann Street. Yeah, really not far from Ann Street. A friend of mine lived down there. He lived right off of Main Street. And I was down there hanging out with him and my girlfriend at the time. And we never parked on Main Street. We always parked in the alleyway behind his building when we were down there. Because there was a lot. There's a couple lots down there for businesses. And after like 5 p.m., people who lived in the area would park there. So we're parked in one of those little side lots. And we're leaving. There's like a fire escape down the back. We came down there and we were at our cars. Now, I lived up by Lake Wallenpaupack. She lived down by Wind Gap, Pennsylvania. So we're saying our goodnights. And as we're standing there, and I don't know if I saw it first or she saw it first or if we saw it at the same time, but we saw what I think is called an Archimedes fireball. And it's like a meteor, or I guess you call it a meteor. But it's a fireball in the sky, and it was clear enough and large enough that we could see it. We could see the actual structure of this rock as it was tumbling through our atmosphere on fire. It looked like someone took a roll of toilet paper. That's the only way I can really describe it. Like you take a roll of toilet paper, lay it on fire, and throw it. There was like pieces coming off it. It was kind of tumbling, and it was kind of oblong the way it was shaped. And it went over, and we both saw it. And as it came over, we saw for maybe like if you count like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, maybe a count of 7 or 8 before it started to like move out of our view, because it was all open there. Like we could see easily over the building. We're in a lot of trees. We're in an alleyway, which is pretty wide open. So as it started to go out of view, I took off down the alleyway and ran down to the next cross street because I wanted to see where it went, like at least get some open sky and see it. Because if it hit the ground, that was a big rock. And I mean, probably wouldn't be here right now talking about this. If that hit the ground anywhere near me, probably would have got blown up. And so I got around the corner, I got to the cross street, and I saw it as it went over the mountain, over the hill on the other side of town, and it just disappeared. And I was like, oh my God. So we're like yelling back and forth to each other as I'm running down the street. And I see it goes out of view. I turn around, I start walking back, and it was maybe a half a block I ran down. And as I'm walking back, I noticed that a cop car has pulled up. And 2 blocks down, block and a half down, the other direction was like a little nightclub, and the cops would sit back behind there. And all they know is they saw me running down the street. We were yelling back and forth, and there's my girlfriend standing there. So they come tearing down the alleyway, and they pull up, and they're like, "Mister, are you okay?" And all of a sudden we're like, "Oh, holy crap. Yeah, no, nothing." So we're standing at the door of the cop car, and we're talking to these 2 Stroudsburg police, and they're like, "Well, what's going on? What, why did you run away?" And we're like, "You didn't see that." And they're like, "See what?" So we explained to them what we saw. And the cop looks at me, he looks at both of us, and he goes, "Don't care, don't want to know. If you're not filing a report," he goes, "we're not filing a report. It's too much paperwork for this X-Files bullshit." And he rolled the window up and they drove away. And we just stood there like, really? So yeah, anything even a little bit out of the ordinary, I could definitely see the Stroudsburg police just being like, "Nope, didn't see it, didn't happen. See you later." That does not surprise me at all. And that's it for the Rainman story. Again, if you have a chance, I'll put a link to the Unsolved Mysteries episode. I think it's about 15 minutes long. I think 12 to 15 minutes long, the segment that goes over the story. And if for anything else, it's a 1990s, an early 1990s episode of Unsolved Mysteries. The reenactments they're just pure gold if you want to watch those. They do, if I remember correctly, they kind of portray Decker a little bit younger. And I do believe he was at least 30, in his 30s. I've seen some people kind of like try to reenact it, and they make him out to be a lot younger. He was not. Some people call him Rain Boy. Was not. And a lot of times, all these stories skirt around the fact that this story starts with him in prison. So there's a lot of questionable situations here. Could this have been a ploy for him to get out of jail? Because I think he only knew the Kiefers for a few months before this point. So was this planned? Were they like, "Hey, we're gonna try to get him out of jail because maybe psychiatric reasons"? But then why? Again, it all circles back. Why would the police go along with it? He was upstairs in the upstairs bathroom before this all happened, and then there was a loud noise. Did he do something to the plumbing? But then the landlord says the plumbing wasn't over that section of the house. Like all these things, as I'm going through this, all these things I'm thinking, like, could this be? Was it an insurance thing with the landlord and the Kiefers and Donald Decker and the lady at the pizza place were all in on it? Maybe, I mean, Stroudsburg's not a big town. Maybe he knows those cops. Maybe he knows the prison guards and the warden. And they're all like, yeah, if we just keep this going, maybe you'll get some money for that house. Because I guess the house is gone now. Was it irreparably damaged? I did read a report that said that the Kiefers could not get the water damage out of the house after this happened, which isn't really a big surprise. You get that much water if it's raining for 3 days in your house. I'd be curious to know if anybody ever looked at the water meter to see if there was a excessive amount of water used over those 3 days, like for that month. These aren't things that I've ever seen investigated, and something like that could answer a lot of questions, but those aren't questions I have answers to. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any comments, if there's any information you may have on this, you can contact us at podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. You can comment on the video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, you can actually leave us a voice note, and you can also answer. There's like a poll there. What you think of this episode? You can give us information on that as well. Really do appreciate everyone listening. If you made it this far, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving, those of you in the U.S., and with Christmas and New Year's and all the other holidays coming up. It's going to be busy for everybody, and I'm going to try to keep you entertained through that. Thanks again for listening. I've enjoyed this one, and usually I've been aiming for 16 episodes a season. This is episode 16 of season 5, but I'm going to keep going because season 2 got short at one, and season 4 got short at a couple, and then season 3 took me a long time to get all those edited the right way. So going to keep on giving you episodes for season 5. That's going to do it for me for this week. This has been the Primitive Intelligence Podcast. See ya.